Hi, my name is Susan, and I'm going to be demonstrating how to make wooden toys using patterns by Toymaker Press. First thing you need to do is have a pattern, and I usually take the patterns from the books. This is the book that I'm going to be using. I copy them onto copy paper, cut out, just leaving a little bit of space around, like I have done here. And then you need to have a way to put your pattern onto your wood. And what I found works the best for me is to use my Xyron machine, which is a scrapbooking tool. The first thing I do, because the scrapbooking tool, the adhesive is fairly expensive, I lay out my patterns that I'm going to be working on in the next couple of weeks, and I take them all together, kind of like putting a puzzle together. You have to see how they fit, and just use little small pieces of tape to hold them together. And then when I have the pattern ready, you just feed it into the machine. And this is using the temporary repositionable adhesive in the machine. You just turn the crank, and you have your patterns. You pull off the plastic that covers it, and on the back of each of your pieces now is a repositionable adhesive. It's just like making stickers. And then put them on the wood. Now this particular pattern I'm going to be demonstrating today is one of the prehistoric animals, and I need 3 different sizes of wood for it. The body is going to be a 3/4 inch, the legs are going to be 1/2 inch, and then he has an eyebrow, which is 1/8 inch wood. So I'm using walnut. And again, I just peel this off of the backing paper. It's a sticker, and it's repositionable, so you can kind of move it around, see how it best fits on your wood. And you just press it down, just like that. If you need to move it, it just comes right up, and when you're done scroll sawing, it also removes really nice and easy. Now, just to keep the wood from burning too much when I'm sawing, I always cover my wood with some clear packing tape. This is the part that's going to be used for the legs. This is 1/2 inch wood. And I've actually just aligned these so that the grain line is the same on each of the wood. Now, if your legs are all the same, in other words, you have 2 of the same front legs, 2 of the same back legs, you can actually take your wood, take 2 pieces, tape them together. I just use masking tape to hold them together, and then you can cut the 2 pieces out at the same time. Alright, once you have everything all ready to go, then it's time to go down to the shop. I just use a scroll saw to cut these out, so we'll take you down there and show you how that's done. Hi, welcome to my shop. I'm going to start by cutting out the body, which is on 3/4 inch walnut. I've rough cut around it just a little bit because for me it's easier to maneuver smaller pieces of wood. It's really just a matter of what you're comfortable with. One of the hardest parts about scroll sawing is to match your blade to your wood, and it really is more of an art than a science. The best advice I can give you is to have blades from a lot of different manufacturers, different configuration of blades. In other words, some skip tooths, some reverse tooths, and just try them out and see how they cut. If it works, great. If not, then try a different blade. And you just have to kind of get a feel for what's going to work on each particular type of wood. I'm going to be cutting this one with the number 7 blade. It's a pretty simple design. It doesn't have a lot of really sharp angles and turns, and it'll cut a little bit faster than a smaller blade. When you scroll saw, you always need protection from the dust. Always wear a dust mask. It's a good idea to have eye protection as well. finished cutting the body, but there's one last thing we need to do before we can remove the pattern from the wood, and that's to drill the eye. You can actually drill the eye before you start if you want to. Just make sure you take some sandpaper and smooth off the back side before you start scroll sawing so it doesn't catch on your table. Line up the drill bit, make sure it's in the position you want. Make sure that you're drilling into a piece of wood. That keeps it from chipping out on the back side. And then we're ready to remove our pattern. And again, it just peels right off. And we have the finished body part of this prehistoric creature. Alright, we're going to go ahead and cut the legs next. We finished cutting all the pieces for our prehistoric animal, and now we're going to sand them. And you can sand using power sanders if you prefer, but I prefer to sand by hand. It's just a little bit easier for me to control what I'm doing. And I use 320 grit and 400 grit sandpaper. You don't need to take a lot off, just kind of around the edges, so you really don't need anything that's rougher than that. I rip off a piece of sandpaper. It's just easier to work with a small piece than with the whole sheet. And the first thing I do is to round over the edges. And you want to sand pretty much perpendicular to the way that you've cut. That helps keep the grain from chipping. And you want to make sure that you do all edges. Even though the cut edge from the saw is very smooth, there are a few rough spots that do show up, so you want to make sure you get those edges as well. And then front and back for all the surfaces. Usually I go with 320 grit first, and then when I'm done with that I go back over with 400 grit until it's a very silky smooth finish. Alright, we have the entire dinosaur creature cut out and sanded, and now we're ready to glue it together. Each of the legs needs to be glued on individually. That way we can make sure that they're all going to touch the floor and he won't be standing crooked. I like to use a copy of the pattern, a Xerox copy, just to lay out the first leg. That way I can kind of make sure that it's in the right position on his body. So we're going to start with his rear back leg. And I've got it in position. I'm going to put some wood glue on it. And then I'm going to put the body on top of it. And this one, since it's the first one, we don't need to make sure that it lines up with the other legs. So this one I'm just going to do flat. And then I'll put a heavy book on top of it just to give it a little bit of pressure while it's drying. You get some glue that squeezes out occasionally, and you can just clean that up with a little bit of water. And we'll let that one dry for about a half hour, and then we'll come back and we'll glue the rest of the legs on. Okay, we're getting ready to glue the second leg on. I'm going to glue the front leg that's on the same side as the back leg we just glued on. But instead of lining it up now with the piece of paper, we need to make sure that the feet are going to touch the ground and that the dinosaur is not going to be leaning. So we're going to have to hold it up until the glue sets up. We need to make sure that both the front and the back feet are touching the ground. and that he's not leaning. And then we're just going to hold it here for a few minutes until the glue sets. Alright, we're ready to put the last leg onto this dinosaur. And once again, we need to make sure to hold it vertically to make sure it's not leaning and to make sure that it's actually touching the tabletop. And then just hold it into position for a few minutes until the glue sets up, and then we can lay it down flat and put a book back on top. And then after that, the only other thing is to put the other eyebrow on. I glued the one on when I finished that side with the legs, and then when I lay this flat, I'll glue the last eyebrow on. And then we're going to let it sit overnight for about 24 hours just to make sure the glue is really set up well before we start putting the polish on it. We're ready to finish our wooden toy. The last thing we need to do is to put a type of a finish on it. Normally with my woodworking I use either penetrating oil or a urethane gel, but because this is a toy for children we want to use an all-natural finish. And so I'm going to be using a mixture of beeswax and a type of a tree oil to finish the toy. You just take an old rag and wipe on the polish, and then you want to cover every surface of the toy. You can use a paintbrush to get into areas that would be hard to reach with the rag. And after you're done putting this on the toy, you're going to let it sit for about 15 to 30 minutes just to give the oil plenty of time to soak in, and then we're going to wipe it off and buff it with a cotton rag. Okay, the last step after the oil has had a chance to soak in is to buff it off using a cotton cloth, a lint-free cloth. These are actually feed sack cloths and they work really well for this. And you just need to go over every surface and just to make sure there's no leftover oil or wax on the toy and to give it a nice shine when it's finished.